She thought a few carefully chosen words would be all it took to have a black man removed from first class, until he calmly reached into his pocket and flashed his FBI badge. Patricia Langford moved gracefully through Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her designer carry-on gliding effortlessly behind her. This was a routine journey for her, Dallas to Washington, D.C., always first class, the only way she traveled. Air travel had long since lost its surprises. She knew what to expect: priority boarding, complimentary champagne, hushed conversations between high-profile professionals. Comfort and exclusivity were non-negotiable. So, when she reached her assigned row and saw a black man already seated beside her, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, her steps faltered. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his laptop open, eyes scanning the screen as if he were reviewing something of great importance. Patricia's lips pressed together. With just a little more force than necessary, she set down her designer tote and took her seat, barely concealing her displeasure. First class wasn't supposed to be like this. The man beside her, Daniel Stokes, barely spared her a glance. He was typing, absorbed in his work, his focus unshaken. The soft glow of the screen reflected off his deep brown skin, accentuating the sharp angles of his face. He looked like he belonged there. But Patricia wasn't convinced. She inhaled sharply through her nose, shifting in her seat. As she adjusted her posture, her purse nudged his armrest. No reaction from him. She sat up straighter, her eyes flicking around the cabin, as if expecting someone, perhaps a flight attendant, to notice this oversight. Then she decided to take the next step. She leaned slightly toward him, just enough to make sure he felt her presence. "Excuse me," she said, voice laced with forced politeness. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Daniel didn't even bother looking up. Yes. That was it. No additional words, no elaboration, no explanation. Patricia cleared her throat, glancing around once more. This time, her gaze landed on a flight attendant, Emily Jacobs, a young woman in her early 30s, busy assisting passengers a few rows ahead. Lifting her hand slightly, Patricia signaled Emily over. Daniel sighed, not loud, but noticeable. Emily approached, her professional smile unwavering. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Patricia let out a small, practiced chuckle, shaking her head as though the situation was amusing. "I believe there's been a little mix-up," she said lightly. "I think this gentleman may be in the wrong seat." Emily's eyes flicked to Daniel, who finally paused his typing and looked up. His face remained unreadable, his expression calm. But there was something in his eyes. Not confusion. Not surprise. Something else. Emily pulled out her tablet and quickly scanned the passenger manifest. "Actually," she said politely, "Mr. Stokes is in his correct seat. Your ticket says 2A and he is in 2B. Patricia blinked, fingers tightening slightly on the armrest. "That's odd," she murmured, forcing another light laugh. "Are you sure? I just assumed." Emily's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure, ma'am. Everything checks out." For just a fraction of a second, Patricia's carefully composed expression wavered before she forced it back into place, offering a tight-lipped smile. "Well," she exhaled, turning toward the window, "I suppose mistakes happen." But she wasn't done. Not even close. Daniel, on the other hand, had already turned his attention back to his work. Emily hesitated briefly, sensing the tension in the air, then gave Daniel a quick nod before stepping away. Meanwhile, Patricia sat stiffly, arms crossed, her mind racing. This wasn't right. It wasn't how first class was supposed to be. She had flown like this for decades, and never had she been placed in a situation like this. Her breath quickened, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. She couldn't just sit here and accept this. She pressed the call button. A soft chime rang overhead, and moments later, Emily reappeared, her professional warmth unchanged. "Ma'am, is there something I can help you with?" Patricia kept her tone low, controlled. "I'd like to request a seat change." Emily blinked. "Oh, are you uncomfortable? Is there an issue with the seat?" A half-second hesitation. Patricia couldn't just say what she was really thinking. Instead, she inclined her head ever so slightly toward Daniel, lowering her voice even further. I don't feel comfortable sitting here, she said slowly, deliberately. Emily's smile faltered. I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am. If there's a technical issue with the seat, I'd be happy to. No, Patricia interrupted, exhaling sharply. It's not the seat, she hesitated. Just long enough to let the implication settle. I just prefer to sit elsewhere. Emily glanced at Daniel. He had paused his typing again, but still hadn't spoken. He was listening, waiting. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, his jaw tight. Let me check for available seats, Emily said, tapping her tablet. Just a moment. Patricia sat back, her lips pressed into a thin line. Daniel, still silent, made no attempt to argue, no effort to acknowledge her or justify his presence. That only made her angrier. A few rows ahead, a man in a blazer pretended to check his phone, but was clearly eavesdropping. Across the aisle, a woman nudged her husband. People were starting to notice. Emily's fingers moved quickly across the screen. I'm afraid we're at full capacity today, ma'am. There are no open first-class seats. Patricia's stomach clenched. Emily smiled apologetically. Would you like me to check in economy? There might be a seat available there. Patricia's face burned. Economy? She nearly choked on the word, as if that was even an option. Her voice caught. That won't work. Emily's smile remained polite. In that case, I hope you don't mind staying in your assigned seat. Patricia forced another tight smile. I suppose I have no choice. Emily gave a small nod. Let me know if you need anything else. But Patricia barely heard her. Her ears were ringing. Daniel, still saying nothing, simply resumed typing. That was it. That was his response. He was going to act as though she didn't exist. Her fingers curled into fists. This wasn't over. She exhaled sharply and pressed the call button again. This time, Emily hesitated before returning. Ma'am? Patricia straightened. I need to speak to someone in charge. Emily's face remained neutral. I'm the lead flight attendant, ma'am. Is there something I can clarify for you? Her voice sharpened. I need to speak to the head crew member. Or the pilot. A murmur spread through the cabin. Someone let out a quiet chuckle. Emily's patience was clearly thinning. Ma'am, the pilot is preparing for takeoff and will not be available, but I'm happy to assist you. Patricia's jaw tightened. Daniel still wasn't reacting. No nervousness, no discomfort. Like he'd done this before. She lowered her voice. I don't feel safe. Everything shifted. Emily's smile vanished. Daniel stopped typing. Across the aisle, a businessman muttered, Here we go again. Passengers leaned in. A phone camera discreetly lifted. Emily inhaled slowly. Ma'am, are you saying you feel threatened? Patricia tilted her head. I'm not saying that. I just don't feel comfortable. Silence. Then, Daniel closed his laptop, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his badge. The rest of the flight was a blur of humiliation. The whispers never stopped. The occasional glance in her direction felt like a spotlight burning into her skin. Her perfectly curated world, the one where she was always in control, always respected, had crumbled in real time, and there was no putting it back together. By the time the plane landed in D.C., she barely had the nerve to lift her head. But it didn't matter, because as soon as she powered her phone back on, the first notification she saw was a message from a colleague.